Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her uniform sleeve for the third time that morning, making sure the black ink remained hidden beneath the crisp fabric. The September heat in Fort Braxton was unforgiving, but she had learned long ago that some discomforts were worth enduring. The tattoo that wrapped around her right wrist like a living shadow had caused her enough trouble already. She stood outside Colonel Richard Davidson's office, her polished boots reflecting the fluorescent lights of the administrative building. Through the frosted glass door, she could see his silhouette hunched over a desk covered in reports. Davidson was known throughout the base for his strict adherence to regulations and his particular distaste for what he called unprofessional modifications to military personnel. The summons to his office had come without explanation, delivered by a nervous-looking private who couldn't meet her eyes. Maria had spent the better part of the morning trying to figure out what she might have done wrong. Her performance reviews were exemplary. Her physical fitness scores consistently maxed out, and she had never received so much as a written reprimand in her 8 years of service. "Enter," came the colonel's voice after a knock. Maria stepped into the office, her movements precise and confident despite the uncertainty gnawing at her stomach. The room smelled of coffee and leather, with commendations and unit photographs covering every available wall space. Davidson sat behind an imposing oak desk, his gray hair perfectly styled, and his uniform bearing the weight of 25 years of military service. "Staff Sergeant Santos, reporting is ordered, sir," she said, snapping to attention with the kind of crisp salute that had been drilled into her since basic training. Davidson didn't look up immediately. He continued reading from a file folder, his weathered fingers turning pages with deliberate slowness. Maria could see her name printed on the tab, along with what appeared to be several photographs clipped to the documents inside. "At ease, Sergeant," he finally said, closing the folder and meeting her gaze for the first time. His blue eyes were sharp and calculating, the kind that missed nothing and forgave even less. "Do you know why you're here?" "No, sir. I was hoping you could enlighten me." Davidson leaned back in his chair, studying her with an expression that made Maria feel like a specimen under a microscope. He had the bearing of a man who had spent decades making split-second decisions that affected the lives of others, and he wore that responsibility like armor. "I've been reviewing your file," he said, tapping the folder with one finger. "Impressive record. Top marks in combat training, excellent leadership evaluations, spotless disciplinary history. Your unit commanders speak very highly of your abilities." Maria remained silent, waiting for whatever shoe was about to drop. In her experience, conversations that started with praise rarely ended well. "However," Davidson continued, and there was the word she had been dreading, "it has come to my attention that you may be in violation of Article 670 to one of the Army regulation regarding personal appearance standards." The colonel stood and walked around his desk, stopping directly in front of her. He was shorter than Maria by several inches, but his presence filled the room in a way that made height irrelevant. She could smell his aftershave, something expensive and old-fashioned that reminded her of her grandfather. "Specifically, there are reports that you have unauthorized tattoos that are visible while in uniform. Is this accurate?" Maria felt her heart rate increase, but her voice remained steady. "Sir, I ensure that any tattoos are properly covered while in uniform, in accordance with regulations." "That's not what I asked, Sergeant. I asked if you have tattoos that would be visible if not properly concealed." The distinction was important, and they both knew it. Maria had always been careful to keep her ink hidden, but the nature of military life sometimes made that impossible. Changing in communal areas, medical examinations, physical training in hot weather. There were countless opportunities for someone to catch a glimpse of what lay beneath her careful coverings. "Yes, sir. I do have tattoos that I ensure remain covered while in uniform." Davidson nodded, as if her answer confirmed something he already knew. He returned to his desk and pulled out what appeared to be a printed photograph. He held it up so she could see it clearly. The image showed her during a recent training exercise, captured in the moment she was helping a fallen teammate to his feet. Her sleeve had ridden up just enough to reveal the edge of her tattoo, a glimpse of black scales, and the curve of a serpent's body. This photograph was taken 3 days ago during the joint training exercise with the 82nd Airborne, Davidson said. One of the observers felt compelled to bring it to my attention, along with concerns about your adherence to grooming standards. Maria stared at the photograph, recognizing the moment it captured. Private Johnson had twisted his ankle during an obstacle course run, and she had immediately moved to assist him. In that split second of helping a fellow soldier, her carefully maintained cover had slipped. Sir, as you can see in the photograph, I was providing aid to an injured soldier. The momentary exposure was unintentional and, Sergeant, Davidson interrupted, his voice carrying the kind of authority that could stop a conversation dead in its tracks. I'm not questioning your motivations or your dedication to your fellow soldiers. What I am questioning is your judgment in acquiring body art that creates ongoing compliance issues. He set the photograph down and opened her file again, scanning through what appeared to be a detailed report. Maria could see multiple pages covered in typed text and additional photographs, suggesting that someone had been watching her more closely than she had realized. According to this report, the visible tattoo appears to be part of a larger design that extends around your wrist and possibly up your forearm. The observer noted what appeared to be the image of a snake or serpent, rendered in black ink with considerable detail. Maria's jaw tightened slightly. The idea that someone had been studying her closely enough to provide such a detailed description felt invasive and wrong, but she kept her response professional. Sir, the tattoo you're referring to is completely covered during all normal duty activities. The incident captured in that photograph was an exception that occurred while providing emergency assistance. And yet here we are, Davidson said, closing the file with a sharp snap. Regardless of the circumstances, the fact remains that you have visible body art that violates the spirit, if not the letter, of our appearance standards. He walked to the window that overlooked the parade ground, where soldiers were conducting their morning physical training. The rhythmic sound of their running cadence drifted through the glass, a steady reminder of the discipline and uniformity that defined military life. I've been in this army for a quarter of a century, Sergeant Santos. I've seen trends come and go, watched as standards have been relaxed and tightened and relaxed again. But there's one thing that has never changed: the importance of maintaining a professional appearance that reflects the values and traditions of our service. Maria followed his gaze to the soldiers outside, understanding the weight of what he was saying. The military was built on the foundation of conformity and adherence to standards. Every regulation, no matter how seemingly minor, served the larger purpose of creating a unified force capable of operating as a single entity. I understand your position, sir, she said carefully, and I want to assure you that I take my responsibilities regarding appearance standards very seriously. Davidson turned back to face her, his expression unreadable. I'm sure you do, which is why I'm going to give you the opportunity to address this situation before it becomes a formal disciplinary matter. The relief that Maria felt was immediately tempered by wariness. In her experience, gifts from commanding officers usually came with strings attached. What would you like me to do, sir? I want you to have the tattoo removed, Davidson said without hesitation. Completely. I understand that modern laser treatments can eliminate even the most detailed body art, though I'm told the process can be expensive and time-consuming. Maria felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. The tattoo wasn't just ink on her skin. It was a part of her history, a reminder of experiences that had shaped her into the soldier she had become. The thought of erasing it felt like being asked to delete a chapter from her own story. Sir, with respect, the regulation allows for tattoos that are not visible while in uniform. I believe I can ensure full compliance without taking such a drastic step. Sergeant, we both know that ensuring compliance means living in constant fear of accidental exposure. Is that really the kind of stress you want to carry throughout your career? What happens during medical examinations? Combat situations where uniform integrity might be compromised? Are you going to spend the rest of your service worried about a sleeve riding up or a collar shifting? The questions hit home because they reflected concerns that had been nagging at Maria for years. She had indeed spent considerable mental energy managing the visibility of her tattoos, calculating angles, and adjusting clothing to maintain her professional appearance. I need to think about this, sir. I'm afraid thinking time is a luxury we don't have, Davidson replied. I've already scheduled you for a consultation with a dermatologist who specializes in tattoo removal. The appointment is tomorrow at 1,400 hours. You're to report there in civilian clothes and begin the process immediately. The finality in his voice made it clear that this wasn't really a request. Maria felt trapped between her desire to maintain her career and her reluctance to erase something that held deep personal significance. Sir, may I ask what happens if I choose not to proceed with the removal? Davidson's expression hardened slightly. Then, we'll be having a very different conversation about your future in this army. I'm offering you a path forward that preserves your career and eliminates a compliance issue. I would strongly encourage you to take advantage of that opportunity. The threat was clear, even if it was wrapped in professional language. Maria understood that she was being given a choice between her tattoo and her military career, and the colonel expected her to choose wisely. Understand, sir. I'll report for the consultation as ordered. Good. And Sergeant, in the meantime, I want you to ensure that the tattoo remains completely covered at all times. No exceptions. If I receive another report of visible body art, we'll be moving directly to formal disciplinary action. Maria felt the fabric of her sleeve against her wrist, suddenly hyper-aware of the black ink that lay hidden beneath. The viper that coiled around her skin felt like it was tightening its grip, reminding her of its presence, even as she was being ordered to erase it. Understood, sir. Will there be anything else? Davidson returned to his desk and opened another file, already moving on to the next item on his agenda. That will be all, Sergeant. Dismissed. Maria saluted crisply and turned to leave, her mind racing with the implications of what had just occurred. As she reached for the door handle, the colonel's voice stopped her. Sergeant Santos? For what it's worth, I genuinely hope this works out. You're a good soldier, and I'd hate to see your career derailed over something so easily corrected. She turned back to face him, seeing something that might have been sympathy in his expression. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. As Maria walked through the administrative building and back into the blazing September heat, she felt the weight of an impossible decision settling on her shoulders. The black viper around her wrist seemed to pulse with its own life, a reminder of a story that only she knew, a story that had earned her the right to wear that particular piece of ink. She thought about the night she had gotten the tattoo 5 years earlier in a small parlor outside of Kandahar. The artist had been a former Afghan interpreter who had risked everything to help American forces, and the design had been his gift to her after she had saved his family from a Taliban reprisal attack. The viper represented more than just body art. It was a symbol of survival, of the deadly precision required to navigate the complex world of military operations in hostile territory. Each scale had been carefully detailed to represent a life saved, each curve of its body a reminder of missions accomplished against impossible odds. Now she was being asked to erase it all because someone had caught a glimpse of black ink during a moment of humanitarian assistance. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was being punished for the same kind of selfless action that had earned her the tattoo in the first place. Maria made her way back to her barracks, passing groups of soldiers engaged in various training activities. She watched their interactions, noting the easy camaraderie that defined military life at its best. These were her people, and this was her world. The question was whether she could find a way to remain part of it without sacrificing the piece of herself that the tattoo represented. That evening, she sat on her bunk staring at the black viper that circled her wrist. In the privacy of her quarters, she allowed herself to trace its outline with her finger, remembering the pain of its creation and the pride she had felt in earning the right to wear it. The appointment with the dermatologist was less than 18 hours away, and she still had no idea what she was going to do. The dermatology clinic sat in a strip mall 20 minutes off base, sandwiched between a nail salon and a tax preparation service. Maria parked her personal vehicle in front of the glass doors that bore the simple sign, Advanced Skincare Solutions. The civilian clothes felt strange after spending most of her adult life in uniform, and she found herself checking her watch repeatedly as she sat in the parking lot. She had spent the previous night researching tattoo removal procedures, reading medical journals, and patient testimonials until her eyes burned from staring at her laptop screen. The process was more complex than she had imagined. Multiple sessions over many months, significant discomfort, and no guarantee that the ink would be completely eliminated. Some tattoos, particularly those with black pigment as dense as her viper, could require up to 20 treatments. Dr. Sarachan welcomed her into the clinic with a kind of professional warmth that immediately put patients at ease. She was younger than Maria had expected, probably in her early 30s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the confident demeanor of someone who had performed thousands of similar consultations. "You must be Maria Santos," she said, extending her hand. "Colonel Davidson's office called yesterday to arrange this appointment. Please come back to my office, and we'll discuss your options." The consultation room was decorated in soothing blues and greens, with before and after photographs covering one wall. Maria found herself studying the images as Dr. Chen reviewed her intake forms. Dragons transformed into faded shadows, names dissolved into skin-colored patches, elaborate sleeves reduced to barely visible marks. "So you're interested in removing a wrist tattoo," Dr. Chen said, settling into her chair across from Maria. "Can you show me what we're working with?" Maria hesitated for a moment before rolling up her sleeve. The black viper seemed to come alive under the bright medical lighting, its scales catching the light in a way that made it appear almost three-dimensional. Dr. Chan leaned forward to examine the artwork more closely, and Maria caught a slight change in her expression. "This is beautiful work," she said quietly. "The detail is extraordinary. May I ask who did this?" "A tattoo artist in Afghanistan," Maria replied, not elaborating further. Dr. Chen nodded, and "The quality of the artistry is going to make this more challenging. Whoever did this used professional-grade black ink with excellent saturation. The lines are clean, and the shading is expertly done. It's going to require significant time and effort to remove completely." She walked to a cabinet and pulled out a binder filled with treatment protocols and cost estimates. "Let me be completely honest with you about what you're looking at. A tattoo of this size and quality would typically require 15 to 20 laser sessions, spaced 6 to 8 weeks apart. That's looking at a minimum of 18 months, possibly longer." Maria felt her stomach drop. 18 months, at least. "And I have to warn you that complete removal isn't always possible, especially with black ink this dense. We might get it to the point where it's barely visible, but there could always be some shadowing or slight discoloration remaining." Dr. Chen opened the binder and showed Maria photographs of similar removal procedures. The progression from bold, clear tattoos to gradually fading shadows was documented in clinical detail. The cost would be approximately $400 per session, so we're looking at somewhere between $6,000 and $8,000 total. Most insurance plans don't cover tattoo removal unless it's medically necessary, so this would likely be an out-of-pocket expense. The financial reality hit Maria like a second blow. $8,000 represented a significant portion of her annual salary, money that she had been saving for her sister's college tuition. The idea of spending that much to erase something that held such personal significance felt almost insulting. "What about partial removal?" she asked. "Could you just fade it enough that it would be easier to cover with makeup?" Dr. Chun considered this option. "We could potentially do that, though it would still require multiple sessions and significant expense. The challenge is that partial fading can sometimes look worse than the original tattoo. You end up with something that looks like a bruise or a birthmark rather than intentional body art." Maria stared at the photographs in the binder, trying to imagine her viper reduced to a gray smudge on her wrist. The thought made her feel physically ill. "I need to think about this," she said finally. "Of course, this is a big decision, and I always encourage patients to take their time. But I do want to make sure you understand that if you're planning to proceed, sooner is better than later. Tattoos become more difficult to remove as they age and settle into the skin." As Maria drove back to base, her mind was churning with the implications of what she had learned. The time and cost involved in removing the tattoo were far beyond what she had anticipated, and The possibility of incomplete removal added another layer of uncertainty to an already difficult situation. She arrived back at Fort Braxton just as the lunch rush was beginning in the dining facility. The familiar sounds of military life, vehicles starting, boots on concrete, radio chatter from various units, provided a comforting backdrop as she tried to process her options. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her younger sister Carmen. "How did the doctor appointment go? Hope everything is okay." Maria had told her family that she had a routine medical consultation, not wanting to burden them with the details of her current predicament. Carmen was starting her sophomore year at State University, and Maria had been contributing to her tuition costs since their parents' restaurant had struggled during the recent economic downturn. The thought of spending her sister's tuition money on tattoo removal felt selfish and wrong, but the alternative, facing disciplinary action and potentially losing her career, seemed equally unacceptable. That afternoon, Maria found herself in the battalion training area, watching new recruits practice combat maneuvers under the guidance of experienced drill sergeants. The precision and dedication of the soldiers reminded her why she had chosen military service in the first place. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, a friend from her advanced training course, approached during a break in the exercises. "You look like someone stole your favorite MRE," he said, using the military's irreverent term for meals ready to eat. "What's eating you?" Maria considered how much she should share. Rodriguez was trustworthy, but military gossip had a way of spreading quickly through the ranks. "Just dealing with some administrative stuff," she said vaguely. "Anything I can help with?" You know how these desk jockeys can be. Sometimes they need a little education about how things work in the real army. Rodriguez's offer was tempting. He had 15 years of service and a reputation for being able to navigate the complex bureaucracy that surrounded military life. But Maria knew that her situation was too sensitive to involve others. "Thanks, but I think I need to handle this one myself." That evening, Maria sat in the base library researching Army regulations regarding tattoos and personal appearance standards. She read through dozens of official documents, looking for any precedent or loophole that might help her situation. The regulations were clearer than she had hoped. While tattoos were not prohibited outright, they could not be visible while in uniform, and commanders had broad discretion in determining what constituted compliance. Colonel Davidson's demand for removal was well within his authority, even if it felt excessive. As she scrolled through military legal databases, Maria came across several cases of soldiers who had faced similar situations. Most had chosen to either remove their tattoos or accept administrative separation from the service. A few had fought the decisions through military legal channels, but the outcomes were mixed at best. She was so absorbed in her research that she didn't notice Master Sergeant Williams until he cleared his throat behind her. "Working late, Santos." Maria quickly minimized the browser window. Williams was her direct supervisor, a career soldier with 22 years of experience and a reputation for looking out for his people. "Just doing some professional development reading, Master Sergeant." Williams pulled up a chair and sat down beside her. His weathered face showed the kind of concern that came from years of mentoring younger soldiers. "I heard through the grapevine that you had a meeting with Colonel Davidson yesterday. Everything okay?" The military grapevine was notorious for its efficiency, and Maria wasn't surprised that word of her summons had already spread. She considered her response carefully. "Just some administrative issues that need to be worked out." Williams nodded slowly. "You know, I've been in this army long enough to see a lot of good soldiers get sideways with the brass over things that seemed important at the time, but turn out to be minor bumps in the road." He paused, studying her expression. "I've also seen soldiers make decisions based on pride or principle that ended up costing them careers they worked hard to build. Sometimes the smart play is to give the system what it wants, even if it doesn't feel right in the moment." Maria appreciated the advice, even though it echoed her own reluctant conclusions. Williams was known for his practical wisdom, and his words carried the weight of experience. What if the thing they want you to give up is something that matters to you? Something that's part of who you are? Williams leaned back in his chair, considering the question. Then you have to decide what matters more, holding on to that piece of yourself, or staying in a position where you can continue to serve and make a difference. It was the same calculation Maria had been struggling with since leaving Colonel Davidson's office. The rational part of her mind understood that removing the tattoo was the smart career move, but the emotional weight of that decision felt crushing. I guess I need to figure out what my priorities really are, she said. That's all any of us can do, Williams replied. But whatever you decide, make sure it's a decision you can live with for the long term. Careers end, but regrets can last forever. After Williams left, Maria sat alone in the library as the evening light faded outside the windows. She pulled up her sleeve and looked at the black viper one more time, tracing its familiar curves with her finger. The tattoo represented 5 years of her life, a period that had transformed her from an uncertain young soldier into a confident professional. It had been with her through deployments, training exercises, and countless moments of triumph and struggle. But as she looked around the library, surrounded by the books and resources that represented the institution she had dedicated her life to serving, Maria began to understand that sometimes sacrifice was required to preserve something larger than individual desires. The decision was becoming clearer, even if it wasn't becoming any easier. 3 days after her consultation with Dr. Chun, Maria stood outside Colonel Davidson's office once again. This time, however, she carried a manila folder containing documentation that she hoped would change the nature of their conversation entirely. The past 72 hours have been spent making phone calls, requesting records, and gathering evidence that she prayed would provide context for the tattoo that had caused so much trouble. The same nervous private who had delivered her original summons escorted her into the colonel's office. Davidson looked up from his paperwork with the expression of a man who expected to conclude an unpleasant but necessary piece of business. Staff Sergeant Santos, reporting as ordered, sir. At ease, Sergeant. I trust your consultation with Dr. Chun was productive. Maria remained standing, holding the folder against her side. Sir, before we discuss the medical consultation, I was hoping to provide you with some additional information that might be relevant to this situation. Davidson's eyebrows rose slightly. Additional information? Yes, sir. Information about the circumstances surrounding the tattoo in question and its significance to my military service record. The colonel leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from mild interest to careful attention. I'm listening. Maria opened her folder and extracted a single document, placing it on Davidson's desk. It was an official citation printed on military letterhead with multiple official seals and signatures. Davidson picked up the document and began reading. As his eyes moved across the text, Maria watched his expression change from skepticism to surprise to something approaching shock. This is a citation for a Bronze Star Medal, he said slowly. Yes, sir. Awarded for actions during Operation Serpent Strike in Afghanistan, September 2019. Davidson continued reading, his attention completely focused on the document in his hands. The citation detailed Maria's actions during a night raid that had gone catastrophically wrong, describing how she had single-handedly extracted 3 wounded American soldiers and 2 Afghan interpreters from a compound under heavy enemy fire. According to this, Davidson said, his voice carrying a different tone than Maria had heard before, you eliminated 6 enemy combatants and provided medical aid under direct fire for over 40 minutes before reinforcements arrived. Yes, sir. Davidson set down the citation and looked directly at her. I don't recall seeing this in your personnel file during my initial review. Sir, the citation was classified until last month due to the sensitive nature of the operation. The declassification paperwork was just processed, which is why it wasn't in my file when you reviewed it. Maria reached into her folder again and extracted a second document. This is a letter from Captain Ahmed Hassan, one of the interpreters whose life I saved during that operation. He's now a U.S. citizen and works as a translator for the State Department. Davidson accepted the letter and began reading. Captain Hassan had written in careful English about the night that had changed his life, describing how Staff Sergeant Santos had crawled through enemy fire to reach his position after he had been wounded by shrapnel. He mentioned something here about a promise, Davidson said, looking up from the letter. Yes, sir. After we extracted him and his brother to the medical facility, Captain Hassan told me that in his culture, when someone saves your life, they become your family. He said he wanted to give me something that would mark me as someone who had earned the right to be called a warrior. Maria pulled out her phone and showed Davidson a photograph. The image showed a small tattoo parlor in what appeared to be a military compound, with an Afghan man carefully working on a design wrapped around a woman's wrist. Captain Hassan was a skilled tattoo artist before the war. He had learned the craft from his father, who had been a traditional henna artist. The Black Viper was his design, created specifically to honor what he called the deadly precision I had shown during the firefight. Davidson studied the photograph, then looked back at the citation. The operation was called Serpent Strike. Yes, sir. The name was chosen after the fact, based on the tattoo that Captain Hassan had given me. The mission commanders felt it was appropriate given the nature of the engagement. Maria reached into her folder one final time and extracted a thick stack of documents. These are testimonials from the soldiers whose lives I saved during that operation, along with official statement from the mission commanders and intelligence personnel who debriefed the action. Davidson accepted the stack and began reading through the documents. Each page contained detailed accounts of Maria's actions that night, written by people who had witnessed her courage firsthand. The descriptions painted a picture of a soldier who had exceeded every expectation of military excellence. Sergeant First Class Michael Torres had written, "Staff Sergeant Santos moved through that compound like she owned it. I've never seen anything like it. She was calm, precise, and absolutely deadly when she needed to be. Without her actions that night, none of us would have made it home." Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Mitchell, who had commanded the overall operation, had provided an official statement. Staff Sergeant Santos displayed the kind of tactical brilliance and personal courage that exemplifies the finest traditions of the United States Army. Her actions prevented what could have been a catastrophic loss of American and Allied personnel. Davidson read through document after document, each one adding another layer to a story that was far more complex than a simple case of unauthorized body art. When he finished, he set the papers down and sat in silence for several long moments. "Why didn't you tell me about this when we first met?" he asked finally. "Sir, the operation was classified, and I wasn't authorized to discuss details. Also, I didn't think my service record was relevant to a discussion about appearance standards." Davidson stood and walked to his window, looking out at the parade ground where soldiers were conducting their afternoon training. "Sergeant, do you understand what this changes?" "I'm not sure what you mean, sir. This tattoo isn't just body art. It's a combat decoration given to you by someone whose life you saved in service to this country. It represents one of the most significant military actions performed by anyone in this command in the past 5 years." Maria felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She had hoped that providing context would change Davidson's perspective, but she wasn't sure what that would mean for her immediate situation. "Sir, I want to be clear that I'm not trying to use my service record to excuse a violation of regulations. If the tattoo constitutes a breach of appearance standards, then I'm prepared to accept the consequences." Davidson turned back to face her, his expression thoughtful. "Sergeant, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." "Yes, sir. Have you received any official recognition for your actions during Operation Serpent Strike? Any medals, commendations, or formal acknowledgments?" Maria hesitated. "Sir, the Bronze Star citation you read is the only formal recognition I've received. The classified nature of the operation prevented any public ceremonies or acknowledgments. So the only recognition you've received for saving 5 lives and preventing a potential international incident is a piece of paper that was locked in a vault for 5 years. Sir, I didn't perform those actions seeking recognition. I did my job as a soldier." Davidson walked back to his desk and picked up the Bronze Star citation again. "Sergeant Santos, I've been in this army for 25 years. I've seen heroism in many forms, and I've watched as bureaucracy and politics sometimes prevent good soldiers from receiving the recognition they deserve." He set the citation down and looked directly at her. "I've also seen too many cases where good soldiers were penalized for things that should have been celebrated." Maria wasn't sure how to respond. The conversation had taken a turn that she hadn't anticipated, and she found herself in unfamiliar territory. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room," Davidson continued. I served in Afghanistan during the same time period as your Operation Serpent Strike. I was a lieutenant colonel then, assigned to a different unit, but I remember when that mission went sideways. He paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. I also remember the after-action reports that described how a single soldier had turned a potential disaster into a successful extraction. What I didn't know until today was the identity of that soldier. Davidson walked around his desk and stood directly in front of Maria. Sergeant, that tattoo isn't a violation of military standards. It's a mark of honor given to you by someone whose culture understands the true meaning of warrior service. Anyone who would ask you to remove it doesn't understand what it represents. Maria felt her breath catch. The conversation had taken a complete turn from what she had expected. Sir, I appreciate your perspective, but I want to ensure that I'm in full compliance with all regulations. Sergeant, let me be very clear about something. As your commanding officer, I have the authority to determine what constitutes appropriate military appearance within the bounds of Army regulations. Based on the information you've provided today, I am making an official determination that your tattoo represents a legitimate military decoration and is therefore authorized for wear. Davidson walked to his filing cabinet and pulled out an official form. I'm also initiating paperwork to ensure that your complete service record, including your classified actions, is properly documented in your personnel file. It's past time that your contributions were officially recognized. Maria felt overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of her situation. Sir, I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, Sergeant. You've already said everything that matters through your actions. Davidson signed the form with a decisive flourish. However, I do want to address the original concern about visibility. He looked at her seriously. While I'm authorizing the tattoo, I want you to understand that not everyone will have the full context of its significance. There may be situations where you'll need to explain its meaning to other personnel or commanders. I understand, sir. I'm also going to arrange for you to receive some additional recognition that should have happened years ago. A Bronze Star medal deserves a proper presentation ceremony, and I intend to ensure that happens. Davidson returned to his desk and made a note in her file. There's one more thing, Sergeant. I want you to know that your actions in this situation, your willingness to accept consequences for something you believed in, your professionalism throughout this process, those qualities confirm everything that's written in these testimonials. Maria felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't fully realized she had been carrying. Thank you, sir. Your understanding means more than I can express. Just keep being the kind of soldier that earns tattoos like that one, Davidson replied with what might have been a smile. The Army needs more warriors, not fewer. As Maria prepared to leave, Davidson called her back one final time. Sergio Santos, that observer who reported your tattoo? I'll be having a conversation with him about the importance of understanding context before making judgments. Some lessons are better learned early in a career. 2 weeks later, the base auditorium was filled with personnel from multiple units, their dress uniforms creating a sea of military precision under the bright overhead lights. Maria stood backstage, adjusting her own dress blues and tried to calm the nervous energy that had been building since she woke up that morning. The Bronze Star ceremony had been arranged with remarkable speed, thanks to Colonel Davidson's determination to correct what he called an administrative oversight of significant proportions. Word of the event had spread throughout Fort Braxton, drawing an audience that included senior officers, enlisted personnel, and several distinguished guests who had flown in specifically for the occasion. Captain Ahmed Hassan stood beside her, having traveled from Washington, D.C. to participate in the ceremony. He looked remarkably different from the wounded interpreter she remembered from that night in Afghanistan. His suit was perfectly tailored, his English had become flawless, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had successfully rebuilt his life in a new country. "Are you nervous?" he asked, his voice carrying only the slightest trace of his original accent. "A little," Maria admitted. "This is more attention than I'm comfortable with." Hassan smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "You were not comfortable that night either, but you did what needed to be done. Today is the same. You accept the recognition because it honors not just you, but everyone who served alongside you." Through the backstage curtain, Maria could see the audience settling into their seats. She spotted Master Sergeant Williams in the front row, along with several members of her current unit. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had driven over from his assignment at another base, and even Dr. Chun had accepted an invitation to attend. Colonel Davidson appeared at her side, his own dress uniform bearing the ribbons and decorations of a distinguished career. "How are we doing, Sergeant?" "Ready, sir." "Good. I want you to know that General Morrison flew in from the Pentagon specifically for this ceremony. He was the intelligence officer who debriefed Operation Serpent Strike, and he's been waiting 5 years to see you properly recognized." Maria felt her stomach flutter. She had heard General Morrison's name mentioned in connection with some of the Army's most sensitive operations, but she had never imagined meeting him in person. "Sir, I just want to make sure I handle this appropriately. I've never been through anything like this before." Davidson's expression softened. "Sergeant, you crawled through enemy fire to save 5 lives. I think you can handle a few minutes on stage in front of friendly faces." The ceremony began with the traditional posting of colors and the national anthem. Maria watched from the wings as the honor guard performed their movements with the kind of precision that represented years of practice and dedication to military tradition. When Colonel Davidson stepped to the podium to begin the formal presentation, his voice carried clearly through the auditorium's sound system. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered today to correct an oversight that should never have occurred. For 5 years, one of the most remarkable acts of courage and tactical brilliance in recent military history has gone without proper recognition due to the classified nature of the operation involved." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the audience. "Today, we honor not just individual heroism, but the values that define military service at its finest: selflessness, courage under fire, and the unwavering commitment to leave no one behind." Maria listened as Davidson recounted the events of Operation Serpent Strike, his narrative bringing back memories of that chaotic night with startling clarity. The compound had been a maze of dark corridors and hidden enemies. The explosion that wounded Captain Hassan and his brother had also damaged their primary extraction route, leaving the team trapped in hostile territory with limited ammunition and no immediate backup. Staff Sergeant Santos made a decision that night that exemplifies the finest traditions of military leadership, Davidson continued. With complete disregard for her own safety, she moved through a combat zone under heavy fire to reach wounded personnel, then held her position for over 40 minutes while providing medical aid and coordinating the eventual extraction. When her name was called, Maria walked onto the stage with the measured pace that had been drilled into her during countless military ceremonies. The bright lights made it difficult to see individual faces in the audience, but she could feel the weight of their attention and respect. General Morrison stepped forward to read the formal citation, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades in uniform. "For exceptionally valorous conduct in armed conflict against an opposing armed force during Operation Serpent Strike in Afghanistan on September 15th, 2019. As the general's words filled the auditorium, Maria found herself thinking about the path that had led her to this moment. The scared young recruit who had enlisted 8 years earlier seemed like a different person now, shaped by experiences that had tested every aspect of her character and capabilities. The weight of the Bronze Star, as General Morrison pinned it to her uniform, was surprisingly substantial, but Maria knew that the real weight was in what it represented: the lives that had been saved, the trust that had been earned, and the values that had been upheld under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. "Staff Sergeant Santos," the general said as he stepped back to salute, "your actions that night reflect the highest traditions of military service. Your courage, tactical skill, and dedication to your fellow soldiers represent everything we strive to embody as members of the United States Army." The applause that followed was sustained and heartfelt, coming from an audience that understood the significance of what they were witnessing. Maria maintained her military bearing throughout the recognition, but she could feel the emotion building in her chest. After the formal presentation concluded, Captain Hassan was invited to the podium to share his perspective on that night and its aftermath. His words provided context that even the official citations couldn't capture. "When Staff Sergeant Santos reached my position that night, I was certain that I would die in that compound, he said, his voice steady but emotional. I'd been wounded, my brother was unconscious, and we could hear the enemy moving closer to our position. Hassan paused, looking directly at Maria, but she appeared like a guardian spirit, moving through the darkness with purpose and precision. She didn't just save our lives. She gave us the opportunity to build new lives in freedom. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small wooden box. In my culture, when someone saves your life, they become part of your family forever. The tattoo I gave Staff Sergeant Santos that night was my way of marking her as someone who had earned the respect of warriors. Hassan opened the box to reveal a small silver pendant in the shape of a viper, its design matching the tattoo that had caused so much controversy. Today, I want to present her with this family heirloom, passed down through generations of my family, to mark those who have shown exceptional courage. The symbolism of the moment wasn't lost on anyone in the audience. The tattoo that had nearly ended Maria's career was now being honored as a mark of cultural respect and military valor. As Hassan placed the pendant around Maria's neck, he spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. You have honored the viper well, sister. Wear this with the same pride. The remainder of the ceremony passed in a blur of congratulations and conversations with attendees who want to share their own stories of military service and sacrifice. Maria found herself speaking with soldiers from multiple generations, each offering their perspective on what her recognition meant to the broader military community. Dr. Chen approached her during the reception that followed the ceremony. I'm so glad I was here to see this, she said. When you came to my office, I could tell that the tattoo meant something special to you, but I had no idea of the full story. Thank you for coming. And thank you for being honest with me about what removal would have involved. I have to admit, I'm relieved that you didn't have to go through with that process. It would have been a tragedy to erase something with such profound meaning. As the afternoon wore on, Maria found herself in conversation with Master Sergeant Williams, who had been watching the proceedings with obvious pride. I've been in this army for over 2 decades, he said, and I've never seen anything quite like what happened here today. You handled yourself with real class throughout this whole situation. I had good mentorship, Maria replied, acknowledging his guidance during her most uncertain moments. The thing is, this whole situation could have gone very differently if you hadn't been willing to stand up for something you believed in. A lot of soldiers would have just gone along with the removal order. Williams paused, considering his next words carefully. But you were willing to trust that the truth would matter, even when it seemed like everything was stacked against you. That takes real courage, maybe more courage than what you showed that night in Afghanistan. The comparison surprised Maria. I don't know about that. It's easier to be brave when you're protecting other people than when you're standing up for yourself. That's exactly what I mean, Williams replied. You still saw this as being about something bigger than just you. You were protecting the meaning behind that tattoo, and by extension, you were protecting the memory of what you and your team accomplished that night. As the reception began to wind down, Colonel Davidson pulled Maria aside for a private conversation. They walked to a quiet corner of the room where they could speak without being overheard. How do you feel about everything that's happened? He asked. Honestly, sir, overwhelmed. A few weeks ago, I thought my career might be over because of that tattoo. Now I'm wearing a Bronze Star and being told I'm an example for other soldiers. Davidson nodded thoughtfully. That's the thing about perspective, Sergeant. Sometimes what looks like a crisis from one angle turns out to be an opportunity from another. He paused, watching as Captain Hassan spoke with a group of young soldiers who were fascinated by his story of immigration and military service. I learned something important from this situation, too, Davidson continued. I've been so focused on maintaining standards and regulations that I nearly missed the bigger picture of what military service is supposed to be about. Maria wasn't sure how to respond to such personal reflection from her commanding officer. Sir, you were doing your job. Standards matter in the military. They do matter, Davidson agreed. But so does understanding the context behind those standards. Rules exist to serve a purpose, not to become ends in themselves. He looked directly at her. I want you to know that this experience has changed how I approach leadership. I'll be more careful in the future to understand the full story before making decisions that affect people's careers. As the afternoon came to an end, Maria stood in the parking lot watching as the various attendees departed. Captain Hassan approached her one final time before catching his flight back to Washington. "Are you proud of the Viper now?" he asked with a smile. Maria touched the pin in her throat, then looked down at her wrist where the black tattoo remained as vivid as ever. "I was always proud of it. Now I just don't have to hide that pride anymore." Hassan embraced her in the traditional manner of his culture, speaking briefly in his native language before translating. "May your path always be guided by honor, and may your strikes always be true." As Maria drove home to her apartment off base, she reflected on the remarkable transformation that had occurred in just a few weeks. The tattoo that had threatened to destroy her career had become the foundation for one of the most meaningful days of her military service. 6 months after the Bronze Star ceremony, Maria stood before a new group of incoming recruits at the Fort Braxton training facility. The autumn morning was crisp and clear, with the kind of weather that made military training almost enjoyable. Her role as a senior instructor had evolved significantly since her recognition, and she now found herself frequently called upon to speak about military values and leadership principles. The recruits looked impossibly young to her, their faces eager and uncertain in the way that reminded her of her own early days in uniform. They sat in neat rows on the bleachers, their attention focused completely on her words as she shared lessons learned through years of service and sacrifice. Military service is about more than following orders and maintaining standards, she told them, her voice carrying across the training ground. It's about understanding that every action you take, every decision you make, reflects not just on you, but on everyone who wears this uniform. In the months following her ceremony, Maria's story had become something of a legend within the military community. The tale of the tattoo that nearly ended a distinguished career, only to become a symbol of honor and recognition, was told and retold across multiple installations. But more importantly to Maria, the story had opened doors for meaningful change in how the military approached questions of personal expression and cultural sensitivity. Colonel Davidson had used her case as the foundation for new guidelines regarding the evaluation of tattoos and other forms of personal decoration. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, a young officer who had recently joined Maria's unit, approached as the training session concluded. "Sergeant Santos, I wanted to thank you for sharing that story with the recruits. I think it really helped them understand the complexity of military service." Maria had developed a mentoring relationship with Lieutenant Kim, who had expressed interest in pursuing special operations training. The young officer reminded Maria of herself at that age, determined, capable, but still learning to navigate the complex cultural landscape of military life. "It's important for them to understand that regulations exist within a larger context," Maria replied. "Following rules blindly isn't the same as understanding why those rules exist in the first place." They walked together toward the administrative building where Maria had a meeting scheduled with the base commander. General Patricia Morrison, the sister of the general who had presented her Bronze Star, had requested a briefing on the new tattoo evaluation protocols that had been developed using Maria's case as a model. "Can I ask you something?" Lieutenant Kim said as they walked. "Do you ever regret the whole situation? I mean, it must have been incredibly stressful when you thought your career was in jeopardy." Maria considered the question carefully. "I think regret is the wrong word. The stress was real, and there were moments when I wasn't sure if I'd made the right choice by refusing to remove the tattoo. But looking back, I think it was necessary for me to stand up for what I believed in." She paused, thinking about the deeper implications of the experience. "The thing is, if I had just quietly gone along with the removal, nothing would have changed. The next soldier with a meaningful tattoo would have faced the same decision, and there wouldn't have been any precedent for understanding the context behind personal decorations." Liut Kim no Ditor. "So you see it as having made a difference beyond just your own situation?" "Exactly. Individual actions can have broader consequences, especially when they force institutions to examine their own assumptions and practices." They reached the administrative building where Maria's meeting was scheduled. Before going inside, she pulled out her phone to check messages and found one that immediately caught her attention. The text was from Captain Hassan, "Sister, I wanted you to know that my daughter has enlisted in the Army. She starts basic training next month. She says she wants to serve with the same honor as the soldier with the Black Viper." Maria smiled at the message, understanding the profound impact that their shared experience continued to have on both their lives. Hassan's daughter, now an American citizen, had grown up hearing the story of a night her father's life was saved by a female soldier who embodied the finest qualities of military service. General Morrison's office was larger and more formal than Colonel Davidson's, with awards and photographs documenting a distinguished career that had taken her from company command to the highest levels of military leadership. She greeted Maria with the kind of warm professionalism that immediately put visitors at ease. "Staff Sergeant Santos, thank you for making time to brief me on the tattoo protocols. I've been following the implementation of these new guidelines across multiple installations, and the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive." They spent the next hour reviewing case studies and discussing the practical applications of the new evaluation process. The protocols required commanders to consider the cultural, military, and personal significance of tattoos before making decisions about removal or disciplinary action. "What I find most interesting," General Morrison said as they concluded their discussion, "is how your case has influenced thinking about leadership and decision-making more broadly. We're seeing commanders take more time to understand context before making judgments, and that's having positive effects beyond just tattoo policies." Maria appreciated the recognition, but she was more interested in the practical outcomes. "General, have we seen any cases where the new protocols have prevented inappropriate disciplinary action?" "Several," Morrison replied. "Just last month, a soldier at Fort Campbell was facing removal orders for a tattoo that turned out to commemorate his brother's death in combat. Under the old system, he would have been forced to choose between his career and his memorial. Under the new guidelines, his commander took the time to understand the context and authorized the tattoo as appropriate military memorial art. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, covering implementation challenges and suggestions for further refinement of the protocols. As Maria prepared to leave, General Morrison made a request that surprised her. "Staff Sergeant Santos, I'd like to invite you to consider applying for a position with my staff. We're developing a new program focused on cultural competency and adaptive leadership, and your experience would be invaluable." The offer was both flattering and intimidating. Working on a general staff would represent a significant advancement in her career, but it would also mean leaving the direct training and mentoring roles that she had come to value so highly. "General, I'm honored by the offer. May I have some time to consider the implications?" "Of course. Take all the time you need. The position would involve significant travel and interaction with senior leaders across all branches of the military. It's not a decision to make lightly." That evening, Maria sat in her apartment reviewing the events of the day and contemplating the direction her career was taking. The apartment walls were decorated with photographs from her military service, including several from the Bronze Star ceremony and images of training sessions with the recruits she had mentored. Her phone rang, and she was pleased to see that the call was from her sister Carmen, who is now in her senior year at State University and planning to graduate with honors in international relations. "I saw the article in Army Times about your new training program," Carmen said after they had exchanged greetings. "Mom and Dad are so proud they've been showing it to everyone in the neighborhood." The article had featured Maria's work in developing cultural competency training for military leaders, using her own experience as a case study in the importance of understanding context before making judgments. The piece had been picked up by several military publications and had generated interest from leadership programs at other installations. "It's been an interesting year," Maria replied. "Sometimes I can't believe how much has changed since that first meeting with Colonel Davidson." "Do you think you would have handled things differently if you had known how it would turn out?" Maria considered the question while looking down at her wrist, where the Black Viper remained as vivid as ever. The tattoo had become a conversation starter rather than a source of anxiety, and she now wore it with open pride rather than careful concealment. "I don't think I would have changed anything," she said finally. "The uncertainty and stress were difficult, but they were necessary parts of standing up for something I believed in. If I had known the outcome in advance, it wouldn't have required the same kind of courage. They talked for another 20 minutes about Carmen's upcoming graduation and her plans to pursue graduate school in international relations. She had been inspired by her sister's experience to consider a career in diplomatic service, wanting to build bridges between cultures in the same way that Maria had helped bridge understanding within the military. After the call ended, Maria sat in comfortable silence, reflecting on the unexpected trajectory her life had taken. The tattoo that had once threatened to end her career had become the foundation for meaningful change within an institution she loved and respected. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Master Sergeant Williams holding a bottle of wine and wearing civilian clothes. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," he said, "but I wanted to share some news, and it seemed like the kind of conversation that called for a celebration." Maria invited him in, curious about what had prompted this unusual visit. Williams typically maintained clear boundaries between professional and personal relationships, so his presence suggested something significant had occurred. "I got word today that I've been selected for promotion to sergeant major," he said as she poured wine into 2 glasses. "The promotion board specifically mentioned the mentorship I provided during your situation as evidence of effective leadership." Maria raised her glass in toast. "Congratulations. That's outstanding news and well-deserved recognition." "The thing is," Williams continued, "I learned as much from watching how you handled that situation as you did from any advice I gave you. Your willingness to take a principled stand, even when the outcome was uncertain, reminded me of why I chose military service in the first place." They spent the evening discussing leadership, military culture, and the ways that individual actions could influence institutional change. Williams shared stories from his own career about moments when personal courage had been required to do the right thing, even when it came with professional risk. "The military needs people who are willing to challenge the system when it's not working correctly," he said as the evening wound down. "But it takes real courage to do that constructively, without destroying the institution you're trying to improve." 2 days later, Maria made her decision about General Morrison's offer. She submitted her application for the staff position, recognizing that the opportunity to influence military culture on a broader scale was worth pursuing, even if it meant leaving the direct training roles that had become so meaningful to her. The black viper around her wrist had taught her that sometimes the most important battles were fought not with weapons, but with principles. Sometimes the greatest courage was shown not in moments of physical danger, but in quiet stands for what was right. As she prepared for the next chapter of her career, Maria understood that her story would continue to serve as an example for other soldiers facing their own difficult decisions. The tattoo that had once been a source of shame and anxiety had become a symbol of the importance of understanding, respect, and the courage to fight for what you believe in. The Viper strike, when it finally came, had been swift, precise, and ultimately transformative, exactly as Captain Hassan had intended when he first placed needle to skin in that small parlor outside Kandahar. Sometimes the most powerful weapons were the ones that remained hidden until the perfect moment to reveal their true nature. In the end, Maria Santos had learned that honor wasn't just about following rules. It was about understanding when those rules needed to be challenged and having the courage to do so in a way that strengthened rather than weakened the institution you served. The Black Viper would continue to remind her of that lesson for the rest of her life.